I am outside today and I am doing a voiceover because I realized some people listen to my videos while doing something else, and I do that too, and I realized that I only had one video where I was actually talking, so here we go. I hope the birds don't annoy you because they're pretty loud, but so here's trick number one with studying with Kimmy. So I have a Bible that has a bunch of drawings in it, and I am more of a journaling based person. Like I don't have a problem with people who want to like draw on their Bible, but I personally just like I'm not artistic, so I don't do it. But so what I do is I get a what are they called? Note card. I get a note card. I cut it down to size, and by cut it I mean I tear it because I am a broke college kid and I don't have scissors and I cannot find any or remember to put some in my bag. So I tear it down to size and I tape it into my Bible with my Illustrated Faith tape runner, and it gives me more room to write because I can't write over the drawing or you won't be able to read what I'm writing, and so it's a very interesting way of trying to get more space. I really hope I'm not being too loud. So yeah, see, I'm just tearing it and I'm going to tape it. Very, very interesting. I know. Great way to start the video. There I am, taping it. And then I put it above the drawings. And then Harrison took this video, and so you're going to see a funny moment in now. Yeah. Chapter 21! We're starting. So for chapter 21, on verse 5, I said that the practices mentioned were actually customs of mourning associated with paganism. And then on verse 8 and then actually 26 of 20, I wrote do it makes you happy, and then I marked out happy and wrote holy because I think we're not supposed to live lives that make us happy, and the goal isn't happiness, it's to live a life that is holy. And I think that if you live a life that's holy, you'll actually have joy, which is not the same as happiness. Joy can't be taken away because one, it's a fruit of the Spirit, and two, God gives it to you, and the world can't take it away because God gave it to you. And so I think that when you live a life of holiness, you gain joy that is a lot better than emotional happiness that it's based on circumstance, because joy is not based on circumstance. And at the top I wrote be holy and be separate because that's also mentioned in 26, in 20, and 8 and 21. Chapter 22. We're moving along fast. Okay, so for verse 2, I said make sure that you don't profane his holy name because that is a command mentioned in that verse. And throughout this chapter, I'm highlighting the words I am the Lord because he mentions it a lot. And for verse 21, I wrote walk in his ordinances and keep his commandments. Verse 32, I wrote don't profane his holy name once again, and I think you should pay attention whenever things are repeated in the Bible. And for verse 33, I said he wants to be your God because God is talking about how he brought them out of Egypt to be their God. So he still wants to be our God too. Chapter 23! Woo! Okay, so for chapter 23, I defined a lot of things. In verse 10, it talks about sheaves, and I defined it as a tied bundle of stalks of freshly harvested grain. And then in verse 13, it talks about a fourth part of a hin, and I said that was approximately 1 gallon because that is what this told me. So for verse 16, it talks about the day of Pentecost, except it doesn't, mention it by name. But that's where the origin of the name Pentecost means, because it is Greek for 50th, and it is the 50th day. It says, even tomorrow after the 7th Sabbath, shall you number 50 days. So the 50th day. So 24 is interesting. I change places halfway through. But for verse 2, it talks about, olives being beaten for the light. Okay. And I wrote down that the purest form of olives come from purest oil comes from green olives, and that's used to anoint kings later, and sometimes they used it to treat wounds. And in verse 3, I said to keep around reminders of what God has done for you and to tell them to your children and your grandchildren, basically anybody who will listen. There's actually a verse in Proverbs, I don't know the exact one, but it talks about how you shouldn't remove the old landmarks. And landmarks are basically just reminders of what God has done for you. So I kind of related that verse to that one because it you shouldn't forget what God has done for you. You can use that to get through the new trials that come up, or to help other people with going what they're going through. And so, verse 4, it talks about the flame of the lamps, and it says that the flame should never go out. And then I said the same is true for us, because we should always keep the fire burning. You know, our fire, our passion for God. We should keep it burning. So now I'm switching angles. Woohoo! Okay, so I don't know if you know this, but I am studying the women of the Bible this year. Each year since like 3 years ago, I've gotten one phrase or one subject, and then I studied it all year. One year I was debunking the myth that fear not is mentioned 365 times, which it is not. It's like 180 something, maybe even a little more. I could have gotten some off. But I'm studying, and then the next year I went to boldness, and now I'm doing women in the Bible. And so the Israelitish woman is mentioned in chapter 24. Her name is Shelomith. She is a mother. She's a daughter of Debris, and she's from the tribe of Dan. She was called Israelitish because her father was Egyptian. So she was basically, like today we would have called her mixed race, because she was part Hebrew but also part Egyptian. And so her son blasphemes God, and then they figure out how to deal with that. So this is the first woman that has been mentioned by name since Miriam. And so I thought that she was really important. So if you're watching, I just put a little, what are they called? Tab? I guess it's tab. I put a little tab down, and I messed it up, so then I fixed it. But I put a tab down, and then I wrote her name on it. Well, I haven't yet, but I will write her name on it. And this will make me keep up with her. I'm also doing it for other subjects like holiness or whatever I just happen to fall upon, and I'm like, oh, that's a subject I need to study later. So I do that a lot. I don't know if you do, but that's a tip number 2, I guess, studying with Kimmy. Woohoo! We're learning a lot of things. Okay. So for verse 20, I said, if this is the I verse, the one that everyone references, I wrote down that Jesus will later tell us that we shouldn't take hold of this idea of revenge, and we should turn the other cheek. That is found in Matthew 5:38-39. My dog is whining. I don't know why. So, like I said, we're not supposed to hold on to this idea of revenge. And then, so we move on to 25. Verse 10 is actually on a quote on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, which I thought was really cool because I didn't know that. And verse 17 is telling us not to oppress each other. So once again, I just said treat others how you want to be treated, the golden rule. And at the top, I wrote fear thy God because that's mentioned in the verse. And then 18, I said walk in his ordinances and love his word. And that, once again, that's mentioned like a couple of times already. So if you ever see anything like a theme like that, you better pay attention because it's repeated for a reason. In verse 25, I talk about the kinsman redeemer, and then I say that there's more about that in Ruth and how Jesus is our redeemer. And basically I'm just telling myself that to look up Ruth if I want to know more about that. And in verse 36, it's talking about usury, whatever, however you say that word. It's basically when you charge someone with extreme interest. And so, again, treat people how you want to be treated. It's very simple. It's a very simple rule. We all need to learn to listen to it. So, chapter 26, woohoo, we're almost done. I guess not we're almost done. It's sad. We don't want to be done. Don't take God for granted is what I wrote at the top. On verse 21, it's talking about idols. And I said, don't forget that idols aren't always physical, because sometimes you can make an idol out of anything. You can even make an idol out of your own self-image, which sometimes we all are guilty of. So we need to keep that in mind. And then in verses 3 through 5, I said, walk in his ordinances, keep his commandments, love his word. Once again, like I said, if it's repeated over and over again, it's something you need to pay attention to. So for verse 6, I said that he wants to give you peace and he wants to get rid of your fear, because he's talking about God's talking about how whenever they get into the land, he's gonna give them peace in the land, and he's gonna make sure that none shall make you afraid. So for verse 9, I said, are you willing to establish a covenant with him? Because he says that he will have respect unto you and establish my covenant with you in the later part of the verse. And I think I'm getting into the next video. This is me running to class because I was almost late. Yeah, sometimes I do that. I'm bad. I'm a bad person. Sorry. So we move on, and now I'm pretty sure I already did the first one in the last video, but if I didn't, I'm asking myself if I would establish a covenant with God, because he asks, he tells the Israelites that he wants to establish a covenant with them. So we move on to verse 11, and then I say, he will dwell among you and in your heart if you will allow him, because he's basically telling the Israelites that he will dwell with them. In verse 12 through 13, doggy, what's wrong? Verse 12 through 13, I say that he is the all-powerful God. Will you be his people? Because he's talking about how he will walk among them. I will be your God. Ye shall be my people. And so I ask that question. For verse 17, I said this is describing the penalties of sin, because that's what it's doing. The verse is just describing what would happen if, you sin. In the verse 19, I said it talks about, and I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass. So here I am. I'm actually doing that trick again. Very good trick if you're one of the people who aren't artistic and you just write and that's all you journal with. So see, I have more room now. Okay, so I am taping it down. There we go. So I said, pride leads to the fall, and that's a verse. It says, it's actually pride goeth before the fall, but I just wrote that down. It's Proverbs 16, 18. I don't know why I'm trying to say 20. And then I mentioned Saul, because he obviously had a huge pride problem. We all know this. And so I said, just look at Saul. He's an example. So watch out for pride and make sure that it doesn't creep up in your life, and stay there. Doggy. Come on. Okay. So there we go. And then I highlighted verse 42, and I wrote Genesis 13:15, because it's talking about the promise that he gave to Jacob and Isaac and Abraham. And that's the that's the verse. That sounded like a rap. And then in verse 45, I said that he wants to be your God. Will you let him? And then that kind of goes back to the other one. And so that one's kind of repeated a little bit. And then I said, God gives us free will to choose, and so you need to make sure that you're choosing the right option, because you don't have to serve him, and you don't have to do anything, and he's not ever going to force you to do anything you don't want to do, because that would be against his nature. So you have to make the choice. And this is the end of the video. Thanks, guys.